Thanks for shrinking the time up. Appreciate it. So we can take, why don't we start by offering up questions to Susan?
In fact, I have certain comments to make. Let's say, there are so many questions and there can be so many models like how do you support the environmental cost and things like that. In India, like what we did, we put a cess on coal. So that's also, we put some additional cost on the purchase of coal. So, and that money we use for supporting the renewable energy. So that's also one way of, having something from the carbon pricing. There can be various, I would say, scenarios that, like for example, even Germany in last, I recall in the last Indo-German Energy Forum meeting, there was one area of interest which was selected between Germany and India, is that the thermal plants, the flexible operations of thermal power plants, because the whole idea is that if in India, there is another regulatory provision that if you have renewable energy going into the grid, so that's a must-run position. So that's get the top priority as far as concerned to going into the grid, and you can back down the thermal power. And in order to support that, you have different mechanisms like two-part tariff, some fixed and variable cost, and something, those things are happening. So, but this is interesting, and I think I would like to draw one conclusion from your presentation that if somehow we can make some consensus that what are the external costs on, say, thermal power or the other power, and then that can be added to the pricing of, renewable energy or the pricing mechanism. I think that's going to definitely serve the good cause of pushing the clean technologies. So
yes,
that's
absolutely.
a limited point at this point. So
I agree. Well, there are at least two issues there, I think. One way you could price carbon is through a social cost, like trying to estimate the kind of damage that is wrought on communities due to climate change. Another way of thinking about it is, well, how are we going to incentivize these different climate mitigation projects? And you'd think somewhere they're going to converge, but, well, it's not so much my area of expertise. Maybe there's someone else in here who has comments on that.
I'll exercise my prerogative also as chairman. First of all, compliments, but yours is the nth presentation in the course of this conference that has shown once again that using battery energy storage to do load shifting in mass is devilishly difficult to get to pay off. And the NREL study of India showed no value, and we've done that in the U.S. and we've done it. And you see that Denmark and Ireland and Germany have gone to very high levels of renewable penetration without having energy storage. And if you were to ask on your study what the cost of releasing that 0.4 megawatt constraint that was causing the plant to be curtailed, you would probably find that it was on the order of 10 to 20 pounds per kilowatt. An order of magnitude, maybe 2 orders of magnitude less. So bulk energy storage to correct congestion is a loser. And it's a frustrating thing to watch that learning exercise be repeated over and over again.
Well, I'd say one thing.
in fact,
Certainly.
there is one scenario that I fully agree, and in India, various studies have been done, like very recently by our Planning Commission and Niti Aayog and all, and they have said up to 20%, integration, addition of renewable energy, up to the 20% of the grid capacity is not going to, do any major harm or anything. But I think at the same time, I would like to say that some experiments or have to be done. Like, for example, frequency correction, frequency regulation, little bit storage. So I think those kind of be useful. So those lessons have to be learned so that we can prepare ourselves when the prices are really, bottom out of the energy storage, then we can apply them. And one more thing, in Indian context, that's the difference that renewable energy right now is happening more at the higher voltage level, not at the rooftop or the distribution level. So that's a little difference between, I would say, the Germany experience in terms of integration of solar into the grid and in India. And now we want to emulate the German experience. We want to go for larger number of rooftop, and we are just working on that. So that's
yeah, and we'll go to you guys in a second. But my comment was very specifically on relieving congestion and doing bulk shifting, because I'm a believer in batteries for providing the necessary operational flexibility. That's the place where India should be concentrating.
Can I just add a short comment there? Because I did show some results where there was storage built, but this was at much, much higher shares. So we were talking at 95% renewable energy, and then there's an economic case for energy shifting. But in our simulations, up to 80% renewable shares, there was no case for batteries. And pushing at 95% renewable shares, grids are still cheaper than batteries, but if you don't allow the grid expansion, you will then see an economic case for batteries. But that's really extreme. So.
Well, it makes sense because you can shift energy spatially with your grids, but eventually you're going to get to the stage where you need to shift it temporarily as well. So, yeah.
Open up to questions on thanks. On all topics, including the open source folks. So do we have any questions on that?
So my name is Ranjit Deshmukh right here. I'm from Lawrence Berkeley Lab. So my question is about comparing these open source models with commercial models. I think one of the biggest difference that you all highlighted was the GUI. Like, people have a propensity to click and use a GUI versus, they have apprehension to like code on a command line, right? So is there any barriers to create GUIs, or can that be developed so these kind of open source models can really compete against commercial softwares?
There's no barrier. We just haven't had the time. So if you know how to program a GUI, it's not super difficult. So you could do it web-based or with some other code. I think you guys have a GUI in development, don't you? They have a GUI.
Yeah, so
GridCal has a GUI.
I think the important point is we didn't have yet time doing that. Yeah, so it's a question of why do we? So we ourselves, we don't need a GUI because we are doing the coding directly, and that's much more efficient than using any GUI. So it's then making it user friendly, and so there it is now the question what type of GUI. So of course there are GUI developments going on, but I also said we are implementing that already at a grid operator. So it's getting commercial, and of course he wants to have a GUI. But normally grid operators are very individual ones, so they want to have a specific GUI for themselves, and it's just go on, and as you said, so if you have capacities in India to contribute to the tool, so we are love to integrate any actor there, and who's programming GUIs. That's great.
It only has to be done once, right? And then we can just copy it. So we've already shared code between the two projects. So if you do it once, then everyone benefits. So.
Yeah, maybe the most important part is the documentation, because we had also the question of the GUI, so lots of people asked for it. We made one, but as long as you don't read the documentation, you will not go through the GUI too. So we had then people asking us, okay, so how do I do it now? So at some point you have to stop somewhere, because projects end at some point. But I think the most important is that those projects show that the documentation is very important. If you know what the code does and how it does it, then a GUI is just a matter of, I don't know, we did it in a month with someone who never did GUIs before, so just a student. And like you said, there are even web-based GUIs that you can actually use.
Yes, I have a question. Now, I can see that generally the trend in Europe is increasingly to protect the data privacy. I know there's a discussion going on a legislation which is coming up. And how does it conflict this open source concept? Because you are going to increasingly protect the data through legislations, and because there's a commercial value attached to it. And then how does the open source models deal with this situation, because you don't get access to the data?
So I think this is an important question. We already pointed that out. So the real data is under confidentiality, so it's not open source. So research institutions like ourselves are trying to get into collaboration, because each of the leading research institutions operate with grid operators with confidential data, but we cannot compare results because we cannot share those confidential data. And so we are working now on different levels. So actually we have also started a project called SimBench, where we develop benchmark models with complete data sets, including time series, and we are doing that together with grid operators on all voltage levels in order to be able to share results without using this confidential data. But I also pointed out before, I don't think that this confidentiality in this extent as we have it in Germany should be applied in other countries as well, because it's really burdensome. And it really, so we validate our models with this real data, so we know we are doing fine because we have this real data. But other research institutions starting getting active in that field just don't have the real data. They have to rely on such open source information. And so it's really crucial to have it and as much available as possible. That's really important.
Can I just maybe add a comment? I think probably you were asking about personal privacy, so mapping people's personal data usage. And a lot of the data we're using is aggregated, so there aren't privacy issues, but there are security issues, or the transmission system operators say there's security issues about releasing the location of substations, but we all know this is bogus because you can go on Google Maps and see all the substations, but they don't want to be liable, of course, if there is some kind of attack. So we've had discussions with them about maybe compromises like making the coordinates fuzzy or doing some shifting, but it's a bogus issue as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, maybe to add on that, Tom, that was very good to add. The privacy issue really, so this is on a low voltage level, this is really a big issue, and this is according to privacy legislation, this is even more difficult. So in real projects with grid operators, we are co-referencing the addresses of the people, their consumer information, and we co-reference with the grid data. And of course, this is nothing we can share in a public information. I think that's for sure. But this is the complete information we are using in our professional study and consultants context. In research, it's not necessary to have it in that detail, but it's necessary also to have, what it says, they are disintegrating the GIS data, but actually this is a very important information as well. As soon as you go to grid extension issues, if you want to connect with other grid levels and so on, if you want to integrate renewable energies, we rely in our studies, we rely very much on this GIS data, and then it becomes exactly into the discussion what can be done open source, but as soon as they are available in OpenStreetMap, there is no issue to discuss about that anymore.
Okay, maybe one more question. We're eating into your coffee break.
Yeah, this is Mitav Chen from Indian Institute of Science. I really like the statement which we had made, say the worst open source data is best compared to the best closed data. I mean, that's something which really reared with me. But I was wondering, I mean, how can we change the present scenario wherein, as the discussion was going on, still most of the data that is good quality data is under confidentiality norms and things like that. How can we change that, especially for the public-funded institutions or research institutes, which are basically taxpayers' money? And I don't think, for example, the privacy rules and also the security risk are true with all the things or all the arguments they make. Say, for example, sharing the substation data, which is anyway possible through Google Maps. I don't think that is really high security risk as often portrayed. How can we change this? So that is my question to the panel.
Yeah, I think a big step would be at least that, I don't know, as long as the transmission network is concerned, that the TSOs make a step in that direction, in the sense that that we obtain some data that we can compare with, because you always have this double-edged argument. Okay, you're doing open source, but did you compare? But compare with what? And that's always a hard question to answer because you have nothing to compare with. And it will be, I don't know, maybe a first step not to give the data away from the side of the TSOs, but some efforts into comparing the data, because we invited also some of the TSOs to actually take our data set and say something about it, but we didn't have any, let's say, answer on that. And it's, I guess, in the general public interest that at least something which is, let's say, backed by numbers has to be said in that sense, because you always get this argument, yeah, it's open source, it's missing. So even to have that number, how much is missing is actually, I think, important.
If I might comment on that, just give maybe a U.S. perspective. The way this issue has at least, to some extent been addressed in the U.S. is all of the TOs, all the power entities have a statutory obligation to contribute to a set of master databases that are maintained under NERC, under the reliability entity. So they are obliged to keep that up, and there's a non-trivial amount of manpower associated with keeping those data sets healthy, and they are indeed confidential. They're under federal law, under critical energy infrastructure laws. But it is possible, and it's regularly done for research entities and academics, to get certified, to have the right to be brought into the tent, so to speak, and have access to the data sets. It does hinder the sharing. It doesn't hinder you sharing with somebody else that's got the clearance. That's the way we've handled it in the U.S. It's not a perfect system, but it is at least partially addresses this problem.
Maybe one remark. I have also the impression that people think that when you get real data, you're going to be, let's say, transferring it to the open source domain. But we're not interested in that. We're just interested in verifying the quality of our data. So that's actually the important thing. Because even OpenStreetMap has really strict rules into which data you can actually upload. So if you don't have the explicit license or, let's say, rights to do that, you cannot move this data to the open source domain. So only the fact to compare the data with, let's say, a reliable set of data, that maybe in that sense what you just said will make sense.
Things are getting a lot better in Europe as well. The TSOs, the transmission system operators, are publishing more data. Also, they're becoming more aware of these licensing issues. So there are regulations that they have to publish some of the data, but it doesn't say in the regulation under what license. So they're actually becoming more aware that the license is also important, that the license allows reuse. And in Germany, the market data is now available with an open license, so you can reuse it. So there is real progress being made, and there is awareness among the TSOs of these issues.
I would like to say that it's a policy issue which has to be discussed with the concerned stakeholders. But for you, it should not be a problem. You are there in Karnataka. You can collaborate very well, use that model with KPTCL or somebody. I think they would be happy to. But I think other important thing which is emerging is the standardization of data or something, that requirement and what should be there and the quality checks on data. These kind of things definitely should be taken up at some forum. I personally had some experience of working in simulation models for thermal and some other things, and people are working in those segments to standardize like input parameters, output parameters, and in between, you can do whatever you like in open sourcing also, so that comparison becomes easier, like in some standard forms or something. I think those kind of efforts, if not there, so may definitely can be taken up. But on my part, I am really very happy to be amongst you, that you are doing a great job. In India, we are getting into that space now, that we need more and more information. When we talk to various distribution companies that you please promote rooftop, they say that I want to know which of the substations are good for me to enhance the rooftop integration or something. So I would say these modeling and these exercises are very important for India, and I think India will get into this. And as we are moving for higher scale up capacity addition in solar and wind, we are definitely going to be in this requirement space. With that, I think thank you very much to all the panelists, all the audience, to putting up nice questions, nice queries, and I think this is a very important area, and definitely we need to go as a country into that segment more consciously. Thank you.